When you look at the show, there are times when we're biting our lips from laughing. I'm trying not to laugh.
She drifted through the stars as Judy Robinson, the golden-haired daughter aboard the Jupiter 2, navigating alien planets and cosmic storms. But behind the shining smiles and futuristic sets, Marta Kristen's real journey was far more complex and far more human. Before the cameras rolled, before the costumes and catchphrases, and long before she became a beloved icon in sci-fi history, Marta Kristen's story began in the cold shadow of war. Born as Birgit Annelise Rusanen in Oslo, Norway, in 1945, Marta Kristen entered the world not with celebration, but under a cloud of fear, danger, and secrecy. Her birth came at the tail end of World War II, a time when the world was still burning and borders were defined not just by nations, but by ideology, terror, and bloodlines. Her mother was Finnish, a woman caught between survival and stigma. Her father, a German soldier, had already been killed in combat. But their love, though human, was condemned by the Nazi machine, which sought to catalogue and control every lineage. Under Hitler's Lebensborn doctrine, a twisted program designed to breed and protect the so-called Aryan race, children born of racially impure unions were seen as dangerous mistakes. They weren't to be raised. They were to be erased. Answer: Birgit was hidden. She was placed in a clandestine orphanage, tucked away from government records, where infants like her were shielded from the eyes of the regime. These homes, though a sanctuary from one evil, were not places of warmth. They were stark, filled with children who bore the scars of politics they didn't understand. Many of them never made it out. Some were secretly relocated, others disappeared into state institutions. A few, like Marta, were lucky enough to survive. She would later recall nothing of those years, but the silence spoke volumes. The fact that she existed at all was, in itself, an act of defiance. What makes Marta's survival even more remarkable is that the end of the war didn't guarantee a future. Post-war Europe was a wasteland. Cities were rubble, families were torn apart, orphans flooded the system. Marta was one of thousands who needed a new start, yet very few were given one. In 1949, when she was just 4, a glimmer of hope arrived. An American couple, Professor Harold Soderquist and his wife, were moved by her story. They adopted her, renamed her Marta Kristen, and took her to Detroit, Michigan, far from the broken streets of Oslo. That moment, the quiet flight from a war-drenched cradle to the promise of America, was the real beginning of the star we would one day know. Her journey into space started not on set, but in survival. Not with lines in a script, but with the will to keep living. This was no fairy tale start. There were no lullabies in Marta's crib, no pictures in baby albums, no doting relatives to celebrate her arrival. Her earliest years were shrouded in silence, secrecy, and the constant threat of erasure. She was a child whose very existence had to be hidden, not because of anything she had done, but because of who her parents were in the eyes of a brutal regime. And though she would grow up to smile brightly for cameras, those missing years carved a silence into her soul that would never quite disappear. She has no memories of that orphanage, only the fact that it existed. But perhaps that absence of memory speaks louder than any vivid recollection. It was a time so traumatic, so delicate, that the mind itself may have chosen to erase it. Still, the emotional residue lingered. That sense of being displaced, unwanted, or forgotten would never fully leave her. Even decades later, when surrounded by fans and flashing lights, Marta would often carry herself with a quiet humility, like someone who had never truly felt she belonged. And yet, from the wreckage of post-war Europe, this tiny, forgotten girl, Birgit Rusanen, would soon step into a spotlight the world could never ignore. What began as a struggle to exist would soon become one of the most remarkable odysseys in Hollywood history. In 1949, when she was just 4 years old, fate intervened. An American academic, Professor Harold Soderquist, and his wife, came across her file and decided to adopt her. They brought her from Norway to Detroit, renamed her Marta Kristen, and gave her something she had never truly known: safety, family, a name. It was a new beginning, one that Marta would never take for granted. The transition from wartime Europe to post-war America was dramatic. She found herself in an entirely new world, one filled with possibility. She quickly adapted, thrived in school, and eventually moved to California when her adoptive father took a sabbatical. It was there, under the Santa Monica sun, that Hollywood quietly came calling. Marta never set out to be a star. She didn't chase auditions, pound the pavement, or dream of stardom as a little girl. It happened almost by accident. She was a teenager sitting in a diner when producer James Harris, best known for Lolita, noticed her. Struck by her presence, he approached her with a potential role. The offer was controversial. She was still a minor. Her parents wisely declined, but the moment left a mark on Harris. He helped Marta land an agent, and soon after, the young immigrant girl who'd once lived in a hidden orphanage was stepping into Hollywood studios. She earned early roles in Alfred Hitchcock Presents, opposite Billy Mumy, her future co-star, The 11th Hour, and Savage Sam. Casting agents were taking notice. The girl who once had no name was now being whispered about in casting rooms. She had presence, she had vulnerability, and she had something else, a haunting past that grounded her with rare emotional depth. But Hollywood, ever fickle, would soon teach her how easily a door could close, even when you had the talent to walk right through it. In 1965, Marta Kristen came this close to being cast in one of the most iconic musicals of all time, The Sound of Music. She'd been called in to screen test for a role among the Von Trapp children. She was considered a strong fit. She had the look, the innocence, the emotional range. But when the final decisions were made, Marta was passed over. Why? Because producers deemed her too sexy for a wholesome family film. She was just 20 years old. "I never saw myself that way," she later recalled in a 2021 interview. "I was a Norwegian Midwesterner. It wasn't just a rejection. It was a revelation. In Hollywood, beauty wasn't always an asset. For women, it could be a trap. An excuse. A reason to say no before anyone even read the script." Ironically, Angela Cartwright, who would soon play her sister on Lost in Space, landed a role in The Sound of Music. Marta had to watch from the sidelines as her friend stepped into the Austrian hills while she stayed grounded. It could have derailed her, but she didn't dwell. She moved forward, right into the part that would define her legacy. When Lost in Space was offered to Marta, she didn't jump at it. She hesitated. At the time, she was seriously contemplating a move to New York to pursue theater, her first love. She wanted Shakespeare, not spacesuits. Passion, not plasma blasters. For nearly 2 weeks, she agonized over the decision. Her friends were stunned. How could she even consider turning down a leading role in a network series? But Marta was looking for meaning, not just momentum. Eventually, she said yes. Showrunner Irwin Allen had already chosen her for Judy Robinson, and wasn't looking at anyone else. Still, Marta accepted the role knowing full well it wouldn't satisfy her artistically. Judy wasn't written to be complex. She wasn't a protagonist. She was a supporting daughter. A lovely background character with limited screen time and fewer lines. But Marta made it work. And slowly, she found her own meaning in the show's broader themes: survival, unity, adaptation. Just like her own life. And soon, she would discover something else entirely, a new kind of family. The cast of Lost in Space was more than just an ensemble. They were a surrogate family. Marta forged genuine, lasting bonds with her Lost in Space castmates, relationships that extended far beyond studio walls and script pages. At a time when Hollywood sets could be cold, hierarchical environments, the Jupiter 2 cast became more like a surrogate family, especially for Marta, who knew better than most the value of belonging. Her connection with Billy Mumy, the prodigious young actor who played her on-screen brother Will Robinson, was particularly special. Off-camera, the two shared a deep love for music. Marta, already a fan of folk and lyrical storytelling, introduced Billy to Bob Dylan, and together they would often sit between takes, strumming guitars and harmonizing Dylan's songs in a corner of the set. Their bond wasn't just about entertainment, it was rooted in artistic kinship and mutual trust, creating a sibling-like relationship that lasted decades beyond the show. With Angela Cartwright, who played Penny Robinson, the friendship was instant and enduring. They supported each other through the challenges of being young actresses in a male-dominated industry, leaning on one another like sisters. Marta would later describe Angela as one of the sweetest, most genuine people she had ever met, someone who offered both emotional grounding and honest laughter during long shooting days. And then there was Mark Goddard, the brooding and charismatic Major Don West. Marta adored his razor-sharp wit and ability to crack a joke at the perfect moment. His dry humor had a way of dissolving tension, and she once admitted he could make her laugh so hard, she'd forget where she was. Their flirtatious chemistry, though never fully explored on screen, was rooted in real-life warmth and camaraderie. These friendships weren't fleeting, they became a part of Marta's foundation, proof that even in a make-believe universe, real human connection could be found. And then there was Jonathan Harris, Dr. Smith, a theatrical powerhouse who took Marta under his wing. He taught her discipline, show up on time, know your lines, respect the crew. These weren't just professional lessons, they were life lessons. Marta called June Lockhart extraordinary and remembered Guy Williams playing classical music from his dressing room. It became a safe, sacred space. But not everything was perfect. As the show progressed, Marta began to feel increasingly invisible. The scripts leaned heavily into comic relief, Dr. Smith's antics, the robot's quips. And Judy, she faded into the background. Marta yearned for more. She wanted Judy to reflect her real self, the girl who read Macbeth, who loved literature, who wanted to ask deeper questions. She imagined a Judy who challenged the family, offered insight, perhaps even shared philosophical reflections about isolation and survival. But those episodes never came. Her potential love story with Don West, played by the ruggedly charming Mark Goddard, was teased throughout the show. Glances exchanged, moments shared, but never fully pursued. Fans sensed the chemistry, writers hinted at the tension, but in the end, it remained an undeveloped subplot, deliberately softened by the era's cautious approach to on-screen romance, especially when it involved a woman who wasn't simply a damsel or domestic figure. The 1960s were a time of social upheaval, but television often lagged behind. Female characters, especially in science fiction, were still boxed in, usually maternal, supportive, or silently beautiful. A bold, emotionally complex woman with agency and desire, that was too radical for primetime, especially in space. Marta understood that. Even as a young actress, she was aware that Judy Robinson was being framed as the ideal daughter, lovely, well-behaved, and largely reactive to the male leads. But she also believed the budding romance between Judy and Don could have added a rich, human layer to the show. Two young adults navigating affection, tension, and independence aboard a ship lost in the cosmos. It could have reflected the broader generational shifts happening back on Earth. Rather than complain, Marta reflected with quiet wisdom. In later interviews, she expressed not regret, but curiosity, wondering aloud how that storyline might have given Judy more dimension. She never blamed the writers or the network. Instead, she used that absence as a lens to understand how women had long been shaped and limited by the stories they were allowed to tell. Today, she sees those missed chances not as failures, but as signposts in history, indicators of how far we've come and how far we still have to go. And then, one day, it was over. There was no countdown, no heartfelt goodbye, no final moment aboard the Jupiter 2 where the Robinsons looked into the stars and imagined what might come next. Just a cold, unexpected phone call. The show had been cancelled. Marta was at home when the news came. She stood in silence, stunned. No script rewrite, no closure, just an abrupt ending to a journey that had not only shaped her career, but her life. By all industry standards, Lost in Space had been a hit. The show drew in millions each week. Children adored the robot. Families connected with the Robinsons. The elaborate sets, imaginative costumes, and cutting-edge, for the time, special effects made it one of the most visually ambitious sci-fi productions on television. It wasn't just entertainment, it was escapism, in the best sense. So why would CBS pull the plug? The real answer was buried in network politics. According to Marta and later cast revelations, Owen Allen, the show's ambitious creator, had been under immense pressure. CBS demanded multiple scripts at a time, up to 6, while Allen was already juggling other major productions. Unable to meet the studio's increasing demands, and unwilling to compromise quality or stretch himself thin, Allen let the show go. It wasn't because of poor ratings. It wasn't due to lack of fan support. It was a logistical breakdown, a decision made behind closed doors, without fanfare, and without regard for the emotional investment of the cast or audience. For Marta, it felt like the air had been let out of a balloon. One moment she was in orbit with her second family, and the next, she was floating alone in the aftermath. The truth came out much later. CBS had demanded more scripts, faster. Showrunner Owen Allen, juggling multiple projects, couldn't deliver on time. Rather than negotiate, he let the show go. Just like that, the Jupiter 2 lost its orbit. The cast was devastated. Marta felt cheated of closure. But still, something strange happened. The show never truly ended. Decades after its cancellation, Lost in Space began to rise again. And Marta watched, amazed, as a new generation of fans discovered the show. Some through reruns, others through their parents and grandparents. It wasn't the special effects that drew them in. It was the heart, the message, the family. Even with all today's modern gimmicks, Marta said, people still remember our simple little show. She now sees Lost in Space as more than entertainment. It's comfort, it's hope. It's a reminder that even in the black void of space, love, loyalty, and unity can light the way. In 2021, Marta reunited with Bill Mumy and Angela Cartwright to create Lost, and found, in Space 2, a beautiful memoir packed with rare photos and behind-the-scenes moments. For Marta, it was more than nostalgia, it was healing. Going through those images, remembering those times, she found herself reconnecting not just with the show, but with herself. They even dressed up in their old costumes for a promotion, reigniting the spark that never really left. Marta saw it clearly now. What they created wasn't just a sci-fi series. It was a shared memory, a bridge between generations. Today, Marta Kristen is in her 80s. And when she looks back on Judy Robinson, she doesn't see missed opportunities. She sees quiet impact. Judy may not have been the lead, but she was a dignified, intelligent, empathetic presence. She offered warmth, balance, stability, and to many young viewers, especially girls, she was a role model. Even within the constraints of 1960s television, Judy Robinson stood apart. She was on a spaceship, a pioneer, a woman in the future. As media historian Susan J. Douglas put it, even passive roles, when played with intelligence and care, can shift the cultural lens. That's exactly what Marta did. Lost in Space gave Marta Kristen more than fame. It gave her a voice, a family, and a legacy. For someone born nameless, hidden in an orphanage, destined to be forgotten, she became unforgettable. Judy Robinson traveled through space. But Marta Kristen made the real journey, from silence to storytelling. From isolation to identity, from orphan to icon, and all these years later, fans still stop her, not for autographs, but for gratitude. Because somehow, in the vast expanse of television history, she made people feel seen, heard, and comforted. And in return, they made her feel at home.